Welcome to the deep dive. Grab a seat, settle in, and get comfortable, because today we are taking you into a world that is equal parts mesmerizing, deeply unsettling, and just completely unforgettable.
Oh, absolutely.
We know how much you love exploring those intricate, messy intersections between memory, identity, and the ghosts of the past, so we've pulled together something incredibly special for you. Okay, let's unpack this. We are looking at an extraordinary stack of excerpts from a science fiction novel called Doctor Who Halflife, written by Michalowski.
Yeah, and the setting here is just phenomenal.
Right. The story drops us onto a planet called Espero. And specifically, we are spending our time today wandering the narrow, decaying, yet strangely beautiful streets of a city known as Cyrosa. Now, you might be familiar with the core characters traversing this landscape. We have the Doctor and his two companions, Fitz and Trix, but throw out whatever expectations you have, because right now, they are entirely separated from one another.
Completely isolated.
They are wandering alone, they are facing deeply terrifying existential threats, and to make matters infinitely worse, the Doctor has completely lost his memory.
A total blank slate.
Exactly. I mean, he has absolutely no idea who he is, where he came from, or why he is currently stranded on this crumbling planet. And that sets up the overarching mission for this deep dive. We are going to explore how individuals and even entire planet-wide societies deal with the crushing, suffocating weight of memory and history. We want to figure out what exactly happens when a person or a culture actively makes the choice to forget.
And what are the horrific, unavoidable consequences when that buried past finally inevitably catches up with you?
Yes.
It is a profoundly ambitious mission, and the hook the author uses to drag you into this premise is just incredibly striking. It forces you to put yourself right in the Doctor's shoes. Just imagine it for a second. Imagine waking up in a damp, strange woodland. Your mind is entirely blank. It's not just that you misplaced your keys, you don't know your family, you don't know your origins, you don't even know your own reflection, you have no purpose. The Doctor wanders out of these woods and into the decaying, labyrinthine city of Cyrosa. And in a desperate, almost manic bid to understand the fractured architecture of his own mind, he grabs a piece of chalk from a local street artist.
Yeah, he just snatches it.
He drops to his knees on the cobblestones and starts frantically drawing on the pavement. And out of all the things his subconscious could conjure, what does he draw? He draws Salvador Dali's Autumn Cannibalism.
I am so glad you brought up that specific detail, because that imagery is just wild. For anyone who hasn't seen that particular piece of surrealist art, it is deeply unsettling. It's not melting clocks.
No, not at all. It is a surrealist masterpiece that depicts two figures who are literally melting into each other, sitting at a table, and they are using silverware to scoop out and consume one another's flesh. They're eating each other.
Which is just a horrific thing to randomly draw when you have amnesia.
Right. The Doctor has no idea why this specific grotesque image is lodged so firmly in his brain, but he is desperately grasping at it. He's rendering it on the pavement, trying to anchor himself to some tiny fragment of reality, hoping the act of drawing it will unlock a door in his mind. What's fascinating here is the psychological implication. Autumn cannibalism is fundamentally about self-destruction, about a single entity tearing itself apart from the inside.
Yeah.
And it serves as the absolute perfect metaphor for what the Doctor has done to his own mind, and as we'll see, what the planet of Espero has done to its own history.
Right, and here's where it gets really interesting. The Doctor's intense personal amnesia isn't just a plot device. It is an eerie, perfect mirror for the massive societal amnesia of the entire planet he happens to be stranded on. It's fractal. The individual reflects the society. The people of Espero are suffering from a collective, deeply intentional forgetting.
They chose this.
They did. So what does this all mean for the world of Espero? How did an entire planet decide to just hit the delete key on its own past? Let's dive into the history of this place, because it explains so much of the decay we see. Espero was founded over 270 years ago, and the expedition was funded and organized by something called the Ecumenical Council. To put it simply, we are talking about the Catholic Church.
Yes.
They wanted a completely fresh start for humanity. The founders of this colony looked at the wars, the trauma, the endless cycles of violence on Earth, And they believed that the only way to build a true paradise, a literal new Eden, was to leave all human history, all of Earth's heavy baggage, completely behind.
It's a beautifully naive, almost arrogant concept, isn't it? The idea that you can just outrun human nature by changing the scenery. They didn't want to repeat the mistakes of the past, so their solution was to simply erase the past. They mandated that almost no historical records be brought on the colony ships. They brought virtually no advanced technology. They believed that a simpler life was a purer life.
Right, getting back to basics.
Exactly. They relied entirely, completely on their absolute faith in God and the glossy corporate promises of a mega corporation called Homeworld, which was the entity that actually sold them the rights to settle the planet. They literally bought a brochure.
And as anyone who has ever bought something off a late-night infomercial knows, the brochure is never the reality.
Never. And the sheer scale of the deception here is staggering. Homeworld flat out lied to the Ecumenical Council. The corporation presented heavily doctored mineralogical surveys and falsified climatological reports that painted Espero as this lush, bountiful, temperate paradise, a world just waiting to be farmed.
A perfect Eden.
But the grim, inescapable reality was completely different once the colony ships actually landed and the return shuttles left. The planet's valuable resources, the minerals they needed to build infrastructure, were buried far too deep in the crust for the minimal basic agrarian equipment the colonists had brought with them. The climate wasn't temperate. It was brutally hot, suffocatingly humid, and deeply inhospitable.
Oh, man.
The soil was infested with alien insects that decimated crops, and fresh, drinkable water was incredibly scarce.
It's a total nightmare scenario. You pack for a picnic and you get dropped into a survival simulator. But the real tragedy isn't just the environment, it's the isolation. The founders, in their religious fervor, fully expected that once they established their new Eden, other human worlds would eventually visit. They expected trade routes to open up. They expected the wider galaxy to marvel at their profound religious revival and their return to spiritual simplicity.
But the galaxy is pragmatic. When off-worlders from other human colonies did briefly visit Espero during its first century of existence, they didn't see a spiritual utopia. They saw a struggling, impoverished, technologically regressed society that was barely clinging to survival. Espero had absolutely nothing of value to offer the galactic market. No rare minerals, no advanced tech, no unique agricultural exports.
So they just bailed.
They did. The off-worlders left, and they never came back. Espero was utterly, completely abandoned by the rest of humanity.
And what I find so brilliant about the source material is that you can actually see the physical, heavy toll of that abandonment written right into the world building. We are talking about a civilization that technically mastered faster-than-light space travel, but because of their enforced ignorance and lack of resources, they have completely reverted to a pre-industrial aesthetic. When you picture a space colony in a sci-fi setting, you usually think of gleaming metal spires, sterile white corridors, maybe some flying cars zipping between skyscrapers. Not Sciarosa.
Far from it. The city is quite literally falling apart at the seams. It's an architectural manifestation of a failed dream.
The details are incredible. The buildings have these bulging, crumbling stucco walls that lean out over the narrow, winding streets. They lean so far over that the roofs almost touch, blocking out the sunlight and trapping the oppressive heat. It's claustrophobic. People aren't eating synthesized protein packs. They're eating in grimy horse meat restaurants, lit by flickering candles.
It's so visceral.
And the big entertainment in the public squares doesn't involve holograms or virtual reality. It consists of tatty, disintegrating papier-mâché puppets, putting on historical plays that no one truly understands anymore. It's described almost like Venice sliding into the sea, just gracefully, tragically descending into its final, unavoidable end. And it is all a direct result of this enforced ignorance. They threw away their history and their technology to build a perfect utopia, and they ended up trapping themselves in a decaying relic of a city.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we really have to look at the racial and cultural dynamics that shape this specific outcome, because it adds such a profound layer of depth to their isolation. The text introduces us to a character named Father Roberto, who is a priest of a sect called the Church of the Forgotten Saints. He explains the demographic history of Espero brilliantly to the doctor. You see, Espero wasn't just founded by religious zealots. It was founded by people who were utterly desperate to escape the historical prejudice and the overwhelming cultural hegemony of the West, specifically the dominance of North America and the Eurozone back on Earth. Consequently, almost the entire population of Espero is brown and black.
Which completely shifts the context of their abandonment.
Precisely. Because they were subsequently abandoned by the wider, significantly wealthier and presumably wider galaxy, the people of Espero have developed a deeply ingrained, completely understandable prejudice of their own. White off-worlders like the Doctor, and later his companions Fitz and Trix, are viewed not just as strangers, but with intense, palpable suspicion and open hostility.
They're the face of the people who left them to rot.
Exactly. They are physical reminders of the galaxy that threw Espero away like garbage. Father Roberto explicitly points out the psychological damage done back on Earth by the pervasive myth of a white holy family. He talked about the generational trauma of brown and black people being forced by conquerors to worship a white god that they could never physically resemble. The founders of Espero wanted to break that cycle.
That conversation between the Doctor and Father Roberto in the text is just packed with insight. It's one of the quietest moments in the narrative, but it hits so hard. Roberto is unique because he is one of the very few people left on the entire planet who still actively, secretly studies Earth history. Almost everyone else has moved on. The general population is content to live in this manufactured, decaying present, ignorant of where they came from. But Roberto has built this hidden, tranquil courtyard garden inside the walls of his little crumbling church.
It's a gorgeous sanctuary.
And the altar describes it so beautifully. It's a botanical melting pot. It's a mix of native Esperon trumpet flowers, which are described as this vibrant, deep carmine color, growing right alongside imported ancient earth bougainvillea. It is a living, breathing, biological metaphor for his ultimate dream. He sits there with the amnesiac doctor and tells him that his greatest hope for Espero is for the new and the old, the past and the present, the alien and the human, to exist happily side by side, just like the vines in his garden.
It's a fragile hope, though. And Roberto's church itself reinforces this quiet defiance against the historical whitewashing he detests. Right outside the heavy wooden doors of his church, there is a life-size statue of the Virgin Mary. But her face and her hands are carved from dark, polished black wood, and she has a raised, physical heart carved onto her chest. It's a powerful, localized piece of religious iconography that directly challenges the historical erasure Roberto spoke of. But looking at the broader society outside Roberto's garden, this raises an important question for you to ponder. What is the true psychological toll of this kind of collective generational abandonment? Think about how a society functions when it genuinely feels that both God, who they prayed to, and the entire human universe, who they reached out to, have collectively turned their backs on them.
They don't just become sad, they become hard, they become insular.
Exactly. They become fiercely protective of their isolation. When you're left to rot, anything coming from the outside isn't seen as salvation, it's seen as a threat. The unknown becomes synonymous with danger.
And that transitions us perfectly into one of the most tense and heartbreaking sequences in the entire text. It shows us exactly what happens when this deeply isolated, historically fearful society actually encounters the unknown. We're moving away from the city of Cyrosa for a moment, out into the rural farmlands, to look at the tragedy of first contact.
The narrative brilliantly introduces us to the sheer terror of the unknown through the eyes of a child, a 10-year-old boy named Joshua. And the atmosphere of the scene is incredibly tense and oppressive. It's the dead of night on an isolated farm. Joshua is lying awake in his sweltering, unair-conditioned bedroom. The heat is stifling, the sheets are clinging to his sweaty skin, and he's straining his ears because he can hear his parents, Keith and Ma, engaged in a hushed, frantic argument downstairs.
There is nothing scarier when you're a kid than hearing your parents panicked in the middle of the night.
And it gets worse. He hears the heavy metallic clack of his father loading a hunting rifle. His uncle Ake has run over from a neighboring property. Ake is breathless, terrified. He's seen something come down from the sky, crashing into Wendaker's fields just beyond their property line. The adults are completely panicked, muttering nervously about an invasion, about off-worlders coming to finish them off. They are arming themselves to march out into the pitch-black countryside.
They're ready for war.
Yeah. Joshua, driven by that potent mix of a child's inherent curiosity and terror, waits until they leave the house. Then he sneaks out of his bedroom window, slides quietly down the slanted roof, drops into the dirt, and follows the heavy footprints of his father and uncle into the dark.
I just love how the text plays with perspective here. It constantly contrasts the adults' hardened, fearful reaction with Joshua's innocent observation. The adults are marching out there expecting monsters, expecting an invading army, but when they finally push through the tall grass and reach the crash site, what Joshua sees is entirely different. It's not a war machine. They find this glowing, organic-looking spaceship, and it looks bizarre. It doesn't look like a sleek silver saucer. Joshua hilariously and aptly describes it to himself as looking like a giant mound of radioactive mashed potato.
That is exactly what it looks like.
Right. It's this lumpy, asymmetrical mass, and it is completely covered in these strange, bioluminescent, glowing mushrooms that are emitting a soft, pulsing bluish light into the dark field.
It's utterly alien, rejecting all human design aesthetics.
Huh.
And then the tension spikes. A hatch dilates, and the alien actually emerges from the ship. And the author's description of this creature is breathtaking. It is completely non-threatening in its posture. It has the beautiful, pale, elongated head of a ram, complete with these sweeping, intricate bony crests curving back over its skull. It has a slender, almost fragile humanoid torso, but its lower half is entirely different. It has the body of a horse, but with multi-jointed legs that splay out slightly to the sides, almost like a spider, giving it this incredibly unique, careful gait.
But the most amazing part isn't its shape, it's the skin.
Right. Yes. What's fascinating here is the hypnotic, bioluminescent visual display of the creature's skin. And as it steps out onto the soil of Espero, it clearly tries to communicate. It starts making these gentle, rhythmic hums and clicks from its throat. And as it vocalizes, its skin starts actively shifting and changing color. Vivid, flickering, dark bands, looking exactly like the stripes of a zebra, begin to scroll rapidly down its entire body, stuttering on and off like a broken television screen. And then, seamlessly, those zebra bands freeze, dissolve, and are replaced by a mesmerizing, complex pattern of black and white dots that expand outward across its torso like monochrome fireworks.
It sounds beautiful. To 10-year-old Joshua, crouching in the tall grass, this creature is an absolute marvel. It is hypnotic, it is gentle, and it is entirely wondrous. But to his father, Keith, and his uncle Ake, who are standing there with white knuckles gripping their rifles, fueled by 2 centuries of intense xenophobia and isolationism, this beautiful creature is a nightmare made flesh. They can't see the wonder, they only see the other.
And the climax of this encounter is just sickeningly fast and gut-wrenching. The creature, still emitting these peaceful, inquisitive hums, suddenly shifts its weight and gallops down the sloped hull of its mashed potato ship. It isn't attacking. It isn't raising weapons. It doesn't even appear to have any. It's just moving quickly toward them, perhaps excited to see sentient life. But the sudden movement shatters Keith's fragile nerves. He panics completely. He raises his rifle and fires.
The crack of the gunshot echoing in the silent field is just devastating to read, and the alien's reaction makes it so much worse. It doesn't roar in anger, it just stops. It stands there, completely shocked, and slowly looks down at the dark, spreading smudge of its own blood on its pale hand. It looks at the blood in absolute astonishment, as if violence was the absolute last thing it expected from the universe, and it lets out this low, tragic, guttural moan of pain. Joshua is hysterical. He breaks cover, runs forward, and is screaming, literally begging his father, crying, "Please, pal, leave it. It hasn't done any harm."
And Keith's response to his son's plea is chilling in its absolute simplicity. Keith doesn't debate the ethics of first contact. He doesn't look at the creature's peaceful demeanor. He violently drags his crying son back by the shirt collar, cocks his rifle again, ejecting the spent shell, and says, "It's an alien, Joshua."
Oh, wow. That's it. That is the entire justification.
That's all the justification a man like Keith needs. The label of alien completely overrides any basic empathy, any logical observation of the situation. Keith and Ake are not written as inherently evil men. They are simple, struggling farmers. But they are the tragic products of a society that has weaponized its own isolation. They have been taught that the outside universe is hostile, and so they act with hostility first. They raise their rifles, shoot the beautiful, confused creature again, bring it to its knees, and they murder it in cold blood right there in the dirt.
And the horror doesn't stop with the murder. They have to hide their sin, they obliterate the evidence, they run back to the farm, fetch heavy metal petrol cans, douse the beautiful mushroom-covered ship, and set it on fire. They stand there in the dark and watch this incredible piece of interstellar technology melt and burn like cheap plastic. And the psychological guilt is immediate. Later in the text, we learn that Uncle Lachik is so deeply disturbed by what they did that he actually sneaks back to the crash site days later with a heavy iron spade, and he literally pulverizes the alien's charred skeleton into fine dust, beating the bones into the dirt because the guilt of the murder is eating him alive from the inside out.
But the cover-up isn't entirely successful. Because before they douse the body and the ship in petrol, while the adults are arguing, Joshua manages to commit a small, desperate act of rebellion. He creeps up to the corpse of the beautiful creature, and he steals something. He takes a small, heavy, blue-black, metallic Y-shaped device that is hanging from a cord around the dead alien's neck. He slips it into his pocket, takes it home, and hides it deep in his father's sock drawer. And as we will soon see, that single panicked act of violence in the field and the theft of that mysterious device is going to ripple outward like a shockwave and cause massive, unimaginable biological destruction across the planet.
It is the perfect, tragic illustration of how the hardened fear of the adult world systematically destroys the open wonder of a child. And speaking of destroyed wonder, that brings us right back to the mechanics of memory, which is truly the beating thematic heart of this deep dive. While Joshua is burying the trauma of this horrific memory deep in his mind, our amnesiac doctor is actively fighting a desperate battle to reclaim his own mind. And this leads us to one of the most conceptually fascinating scenes in the text, his encounter with Madame Xing.
It is a remarkable sequence. It blends hard science fiction concepts with ancient philosophy seamlessly. But to understand how he gets there, we need to look at his situation. The doctor has managed to escape from a brief imprisonment in the imperial palace. We'll dig into the Byzantine politics of the palace shortly. And he is on the run in the city. He literally bumps into a street-smart, 16-year-old local girl named Calamy.
I love Calamy. She is so pragmatic, and she has the best accessory, this adorable, fuzzy little pet called a Moki named Nessus that just rides around on her shoulder chattering.
Yes, the Mookie is a nice touch of local fauna. Calamy, seeing that the doctor is completely lost and actively being hunted by palace guards, decides to help him hide. They wander through the grimy alleys, eventually stopping for a cheap meal in one of those steaming horse meat restaurants we mentioned earlier. And while they are eating, they are approached by a very strange, silent man. He doesn't say a word at first. He just walks up, places a softly glowing metallic sphere on their greasy wooden table, and formally announces that his employer, Madame Xing, is expecting them.
And the transition into Madame Xing's space is completely surreal. I expected them to follow the man down an alley to a hidden clinic or a laboratory. But that's not what happens. Madame Xing doesn't take them anywhere. Instead, the reality of the room itself just shifts. The shabby, noisy, foul-smelling restaurant table they're sitting at instantaneously transforms. The walls fall away, and suddenly they're sitting in the middle of a massive, impossibly dark, silent library. Enormous oak bookshelves, packed with ancient leather-bound texts, stretch up into shadows so deep you can't see the ceiling.
It's a holographic, or perhaps even a dimensional overlay, designed to isolate and intimidate. And sitting across the table from them now is Madame Xing herself. She is an incredibly imposing figure, swathed entirely in heavy black fabrics. Her face is hidden deep within a dark cowl, and when she speaks, her voice isn't natural. It's mechanically altered, resonant, and synthetic. And hovering in the air right above her head is a cluster of brilliant, humming white spheres, zipping around each other in complex intersecting orbits, looking exactly like a glowing kinetic model of an atom.
Okay, I have to pause here because the central sci-fi concept of Madame Xing's profession is just too cool not to break down. Calamy refers to her as a vibrapractor.
A magnificent portmanteau.
Right. Let's explain this because it's wild. Imagine going to a chiropractor. You go in, they violently crack your back, they adjust your spine to relieve physical pressure. A viropractor does that, but for your mind, and they do it using viruses. She literally uses custom manufactured, highly targeted viroids, infectious biological agents to edit the brain. She infects her clients with specific viruses that are programmed to cross the blood-brain barrier and physically rewire neural pathways, altering cognitive development, boosting intelligence, or, crucially, deleting and restoring memories.
It's biological hacking at the highest level. And those glowing atomic spheres hovering above her, they aren't just for show. They're highly advanced recording devices. Before she treats the doctor, she states that she is going to record his brain engrams as payment for her incredibly expensive services. And her justification for this taps into some profound philosophy. She cites ancient Zen thought, seamlessly blending it with quantum physics. She talks about the observer effect, the idea in quantum mechanics that the mere act of observing a particle forces it to choose a state, collapsing its wave function and making it real in our universe. She tells the doctor that by recording his mind, by observing him at a molecular level, she is providing him with the ultimate service. She is proving that he actually exists.
I record you, therefore you are. It's brilliant. So, the doctor agrees to the scam. One of the glowing spheres drops down, hovers right in front of his eyes, and physically scans his neural architecture. And when Madame Xing reads the data, she delivers a diagnosis that completely floors him. She tells him that his memory hasn't just been bumped or bruised by a head injury. His mind has been actively surgically interfered with 37 separate times over his lifetime. And out of those 37 edits, there are currently 8 massive gaping instances of memory deletion that remain uncorrected.
That number alone speaks to the incredibly long, traumatic life the doctor has led. But here is where the mystery deepens. Madame Xing offers to use her viroids to restore the most recent, massive missing chunk of his memory, the chunk that explains why he is on Espero. But as she prepares the treatment, she hesitates. She realizes she can't easily fix it. The memory hasn't been repressed by trauma. It has been entirely cleanly excised, deleted from the hard drive. And even more shockingly, she notes that there are clear biological traces of the doctor's own specific neural signature involved in the interference.
Wait, back up. Are you saying he did it to himself?
That is exactly what she implies. The doctor either actively consented to the procedure that wiped his mind, or he orchestrated his own amnesia directly. He chose the blank slate.
To figure out why on earth he would do that to himself, Madame Xing decides to force the issue. She uses her technology to project the fragmented, broken edges of the memory surrounding this massive lacuna, this blank spot, directly into the air around them. And it hits the doctor like a physical blow. It's this visceral, terrifying rush of disjointed, high-definition images. First, he sees his companions, Fitz and Trix, stepping out of the blue wooden doors of the TARDIS. He hears a deafening, terrifying roar. But then, the memory violently shifts to something older, something deeply buried and profoundly devastating.
Yes, the trauma breaks through.
The doctor suddenly remembers a woman named Miranda. He sees her falling to her knees in an unrecognizable landscape, and she's being torn apart by something called the time winds. He physically feels the memory of rushing forward, dropping to his knees, and pulling her lifeless body into his arms. And the specific visual the author uses is heartbreaking. He remembers holding her as her hair, drained of all life by the temporal energy, turns to pure, brilliant white snow in his hands. He remembers the absolute crushing weight of that specific grief. The pain of holding her dead body is so overwhelmingly acute, so fresh, that the doctor physically violently snaps out of the trance, gasping for air in the dark library.
And this raises a deeply important, almost unanswerable philosophical question. Having just felt a fraction of that agony, when Madame Xing calmly offers again to inject the viroids, to fully restore the rest of his memories and give him back his entire identity, the doctor adamantly, fiercely refuses. Calamy, watching this happen, is completely baffled. She is a practical survivor. She cannot understand why anyone, let alone an adult, would actively choose to remain incomplete, to wander around a hostile planet completely defenseless without their own history.
It seems crazy to her. Why wouldn't you want to know who you are?
But Madame Xing, with her cold, clinical detachment, explains the doctor's choice beautifully. She argues that we fundamentally misunderstand how memory works. Memory is not a fixed constant. It's not a video file sitting on a hard drive that you just click play on. She explains that every single time you remember an event, say, the very last time you spoke to a loved one who passed away, you physically restructure the neural pathways of that memory. The act of remembering actually changes the memory itself. You integrate your current feelings, your current sadness, your new context into the old event. It degrades and morphs over time.
So she's basically asking, does altering your memory alter your fundamental reality? For the doctor, the pain of his past, the unbearable guilt of the people he couldn't save, like Miranda, is so sharp and heavy that he would rather wander around a strange, dangerous, crumbling planet, not even knowing his own name, than face the agonizing reality of who he has lost. He actively chooses the amnesia. He makes the exact same choice that the founders of Espero made 200 years ago. He chooses the blank slate to avoid the pain of history. He stands up, turns his back on Madame Xing, and walks out of the illusion, leaving the treatment on the table and leaving young Calamy incredibly frustrated and confused.
It's a profoundly tragic, deeply internal psychological battle. The doctor is wrestling with the architecture of his own soul in a phantom library. But while he's fighting this quiet war in his mind, there is a very loud, very physical, and intensely political battle raging across the city. And that brings us out of the shadows and right into the glaring, peeling light of the Imperial Palace.
Oh, the imperial family of Syarosa. What an absolutely wonderfully toxic and dysfunctional group of people. This is where the world building gets really fun and cynical. So, the city of Syarosa is technically ruled by an imperator, a monarch, but in reality they hold absolutely no real democratic power. The parliamentary system handles the actual governance. The royal family are purely ceremonial figureheads, essentially highly paid mascots, rubber stamping legislation. And they live in a sprawling complex known as the Crystal Palace, which sounds incredibly majestic and opulent, really.
It sounds like something out of a fairy tale.
Exactly, until the narrative pans closer and you realize it's a complete facade. The palace isn't made of crystal. It is constructed of cheap, standard building materials that have been coated in a synthetic diamond monolayer to make it sparkle. But because the government appropriation committees skimped on the maintenance budget decades ago, this fake diamond coating is literally peeling off the walls in massive jagged sheets, exposing the rotting concrete underneath. It is the absolute perfect, heavy-handed symbol of their fading relevance and the overall decay of the planet.
And the familial conflict happening inside these peeling walls is rich with petty, vicious tension. Sitting at the head of the table is Imperator Tenalis. He is a staggering 120 years old, kept alive by basic medical tech, frail but deeply, infuriatingly stubborn. He's currently obsessing over the preparations for his upcoming birthday celebration. He's insisting on decorating the massive halls with traditional tatty fabric ribbons and archaic, meaningless ceremonies. He's man clinging desperately, pathetically to the past, trying to pretend the empire still means something.
And circling him like impatient vultures are his own family. On the other side of the ideological divide is his much younger wife, Imperatrix Alinti, and her incredibly arrogant, sneering son, Prince Javo. They absolutely despise Tenalis's obsession with dusty traditions. They are embarrassed by the decay. They desperately want to modernize. In one scene, Alinti is wandering the halls, wishing she had the budget to tear down the ribbons and deck the palace in modern optical projectors and laser displays. She complains bitterly that a neighboring city-state recently used obscenely expensive off-world matter transmitters, teleporters, for a public celebration. And the irony is, teleportation strictly violates their own high Catholic doctrine regarding the sanctity of the human soul. But she doesn't care about the soul, she cares about the spectacle. She and Javale are just sitting there, tapping their fingers, waiting for the old man to finally die so they can open the planet back up to the galaxy.
And there's also Princess Sensami, who seems almost detached from the main conflict, floating around the edges. She seemingly spends all her time dressing up her pet Moki, a little creature named Lulu, in absurd tiny diamond tiaras. But as we will soon see, Sensami's vapid exterior hides her own deeply dangerous agenda.
Right in the middle of this incredibly toxic, simmering family dynamic drops our main antagonist for this section, Mr. Trove.
Trove is a fantastic villain. He is an off-worlder, which immediately makes him a target of suspicion, but he operates with impunity. He is tall, impeccably dressed in dark suits, physically cold, and incredibly, terrifyingly calculating. He has managed to ally himself with the ancient Imperator Tenalis under the guise of helping him secure his legacy, but Trove couldn't care less about the birthday party. Trove is using the palace's resources because he is desperately searching for a hidden, incredibly powerful artifact somewhere on the planet. And Trove is an absolute master manipulator. He plays every single member of this fractured family against each other flawlessly.
It's like watching a chess grandmaster play against toddlers. What's fascinating here is how effortlessly Trove manipulates the arrogant Prince Javale. There's this incredibly telling scene where Trove encounters Javale lounging on a high balcony, looking down with disgust at the servants hanging the traditional birthday ribbons in the courtyard below. Javale starts venting to Trove, complaining bitterly about Espero having no real history, about being abandoned by the galaxy, about how unfair it is that he is a prince of a junk pile.
And Trove doesn't argue with him. He listens. He validates Javale's ambition and his anger. And then, with practiced casualness, Trove reaches into his tailored pocket, pulls out a tiny tangerine-sized metallic sphere, and just casually tosses it over the edge of the balcony.
And the effect is instant. The sphere drops a few feet, then stops in midair and silently explodes into a brilliant, massive, holographic rainbow that hovers perfectly over the drab courtyard. The light is so pure and saturated that it mesmerizes everyone down below. The servants actually stop working to stare at it. It is a completely trivial, cheap toy to a wealthy off-worlder like Trove. But to a prince like Javale, who has been starved for advanced technology his entire life, it is intoxicating. It's magic. Trove effortlessly tosses the control mechanism to Javale, smirks, and walks away. In less than a minute, without making a single promise, Trove has effectively bought the prince's total loyalty with a shiny, colorful trinket.
It shows exactly what Trove thinks of the people of Espero. They're easily distracted natives to him. Meanwhile, while he is handing out toys to the royals, Trove is utilizing highly advanced covert surveillance technology to track his real targets, primarily the doctor, who he suspects knows what the artifact is. He doesn't use bulky cameras, he uses tiny robotic fly cams.
Which leads to one of my absolute favorite, most satisfying scenes in the entire source material. It just perfectly encapsulates the doctor's quiet brilliance. So, after fleeing Madame Xing's Phantom Library, the doctor and Calamy retreat to a safe house and finally sit down for a real meal. The doctor is absolutely wolfing down a bowl of greasy lamb stew, seemingly completely distracted. The whole time, there is this fat, incredibly annoying fly buzzing loudly around his head.
A very common annoyance on a hot, dirty planet like Espero. Calamy ignores it completely.
Exactly. But the doctor doesn't. He finishes his stew, moves on to a bowl of thick chocolate custard, and the fly is still buzzing his ear. Suddenly, with lightning-fast, almost superhuman reflexes, the doctor's hand shoots out. He pinches the buzzing fly right out of the air, and without missing a beat, he drops the struggling insect directly into the center of his sticky chocolate custard. Calamy is absolutely disgusted. She's gagging, asking what is wrong with him. The doctor calmly picks up his spoon, scoops the chocolate-covered lump out of the bowl, pulls out a handkerchief, meticulously wipes the pudding off, and holds it up for Calamy to see.
And the reveal is fantastic.
It is. He shows her the gleaming little metal wings, the tiny, intricate compound glass eyes, the microscopic propulsion vents. He reveals to a stunned Calamy that the fly was never alive. It's a highly sophisticated robotic camera.
The doctor's deduction here, even with his amnesia, is brilliant. He connects the dots instantly. He realizes that his earlier, chaotic escape from the palace guards was way too easy. He wasn't lucky. Tanalis and Trove intentionally brought him into the palace, secretly tagged him with this microscopic fly cam, and deliberately let the guards leave a door open so he could escape. They want him running free because they were hoping he will inadvertently lead them directly to the hidden artifact they're looking for.
It's a terrifying realization that even when you think you are free, you are just a rat in someone else's maze. But as cold, sterile, and calculating as Trove's technological surveillance from the high balconies of the palace is, it completely pales in comparison to the raw, visceral, biological nightmare that is currently unfolding down in the dirty streets of the city. While the doctor is discovering robotic flies in his pudding, his two companions, Fitz and Trix, are having a significantly rougher night.
Yes, the narrative shifts focus, and we find Fitz and Trix. They have been wandering the dark, confusing streets of Cyrosa for hours, completely lost, trying to keep a low profile because of the intense anti-off-worlder sentiment. Eventually, the winding alleys dump them out into a chaotic, brightly lit public square that has been taken over by a bizarre street carnival. The noise is deafening, the air smells of cheap alcohol and sweat, and in the center of the square, drawing a massive crowd, is a showman named Deal.
Deal is such a sleazy character. He's standing on the back of a flatbed trailer, dressed in this incredibly tatty, bright yellow suit, wearing a pearly king hat covered in fake jewels. He is giving this grand, booming theatrical pitch to the drunken crowd, hyping up the terrifying monster he has captured. And behind him on the trailer is a massive steel cage, completely covered by a heavy, dark tarp. The crowd is tossing coins, jeering, working themselves into a frenzy. Finally, Deal dramatically yanks the tarp down, revealing his prize, a night beast.
The physical description the author gives of the night beast is striking and deeply intimidating. It is massive. It stands over 7 feet tall, but its proportions are completely alien. It is incredibly top-heavy, possessing massive, thickly corded muscular arms and a broad chest, but it tapers down to an oddly slim waist. It doesn't really have a neck. Its huge, heavy head slopes straight down into its shoulders. Its entire body is covered in thick, dark, matted hair that looks less like fur and more like stiff, rusted wire.
But the face is the weirdest part, right?
Very unsettling. It doesn't have a snout like a bear or a wolf. It has a tiny, almost perfectly circular O of a mouth, absolutely no nose whatsoever, and these small, wet, highly intelligent piggy black eyes. Now, when Deal dramatically reveals it, the crowd is initially extremely disappointed. They want a roaring monster. But the creature is just hunkered down in the dirty straw at the bottom of the cage, completely docile, ignoring the screams, just blinking slowly at the bright lights.
The crowd starts booing. But Fitz, who we should mention has been acting a bit strangely, a bit detached. Ever since he woke up in the woods after the crash, Fitz does something completely unexpected. He ignores Trix, who is frantically whispering for him to stay back and keep his head down. Fitz pushes his way right to the very front of the aggressive crowd, right up the iron bars of the cage. He looks at this massive, terrifying alien and he starts clicking his tongue against the roof of his mouth. He treats this 7-foot-tall nightmare exactly like you would treat a stray, frightened dog you found in an alley.
And the truly shocking part is that the creature actually responds to him. Hearing the clicks, the night beast stands up, and as it moves, we see its bizarre anatomy in action. It swivels its massive, heavy torso around in a smooth, fluid motion that shouldn't be physically possible given its bulk. It steps to the bars and slowly, carefully leans its massive head down. Fitz reaches his hand through the iron bars, and this towering beast just gently sniffs Fitz's open palm.
Let's just sit with the tension in that scene for a second. You have deafening, drunk, aggressive mob pressing in from behind. And in front of Fitz is a creature whose arm is the size of a tree trunk, leaning inches from his face, making these low, rumbling noises deep in its chest. It could snap his arm like a twig. But Fitz isn't scared. In that moment of contact, Fitz realizes instantly that this creature is highly sentient. It is deeply intelligent. He can see it in its body language, the careful restraint of its movements, the way its small black eyes systematically and calmly assess the hostile crowd around them. It isn't a dumb animal, it's a prisoner.
And this beautiful moment of interspecies empathy is exactly where the horrific reality of Espero's xenophobia violently reasserts itself. We see a direct, macro-level mirror of Keith and Ake's reaction from the beginning of the story. Humanity's default response to the other on this planet is unthinking, immediate violence. The crowd, largely made up of angry young men armed with heavy glass bottles and splintered chair legs, sees Fitz, a white off-worlder, peacefully communicating with the beast. The mood shifts from entertainment to rage instantly. Someone in the back shouts that Fitz and Trix are alien sympathizers, that they're the ones bringing these monsters into the city to kill innocent people. The mob mentality takes over like a lit match in a gas-filled room. They don't just hate the beast anymore, they fiercely hate Fitz and Trix because they are showing empathy to the designated enemy.
It escalates so fast. A guy from the crowd actually rushes the cage, screaming, raising a heavy wooden chair leg to smash the creature through the bars. And the beast's reaction is incredible. It doesn't roar, it doesn't panic. Without even fully turning around to look at the attacker, the night beast just casually swings its massive, wire-haired arm backward, utilizing those incredible, freakish, swiveling shoulder joints, and it just swats the guy away. It backhands him so hard the man flies through the air like a discarded rag doll.
It's a shocking display of raw power, but, more importantly, it's a display of extreme restraint. If the beast wanted to, it could tear the cage apart and slaughter the crowd, but it just defended itself with the minimum necessary force.
That show of strength holds the mob back for exactly 1 second, but then someone yells that the city police are coming. A heavy glass ball arcs through the air and shatters against the iron bars of the cage, and the crowd just surges forward as one single terrifying organism screaming for blood, intent on tearing Fitz and Trix apart.
And in the absolute chaos of the trush, as fists are flying and people are being trampled, Fitz is suddenly grabs from behind. Someone incredibly strong pulls him violently backward out of the immediate danger of the surging mob. Trix, fighting for her life, catches a glimpse of his rescuer through the bodies. She realizes, to her shock, that it's the young Princess Sensimi, the same princess who was dressing up her pet in the palace earlier. Sensimi clearly has a deeply hidden secret agenda regarding the night beasts, and she rescues Fitz specifically because he just publicly demonstrated a unique affinity and empathy with the creature.
But the rescue is selective. Sensimi grabs Fitz, her guards push a path through the crowd, and they vanish into the dark alleys. But they don't grab Trix, they leave her behind. Trix is violently shoved aside by the mob, knocked off her feet. By the time she scrambles back up, bruised and terrified, the crowd has moved past her, following the cage. And Trix is left completely, utterly alone in the dark, hostile, labyrinthine alleys of Cyrosa.
And let me tell you, being left alone in that specific dark alley leads directly into the most conceptually horrifying, deeply unsettling sequence of this entire deep dive. This brings us to the ultimate subversion of identity.
I genuinely had to put the text down and walk away for a minute after reading this part. It is pure biological horror. So Trix is catching her breath, leaning against a damp brick wall, trying to figure out how to find Fitz in a city that actively wants to kill her. She hears a noise, turns, and spots a small figure hiding in the deep shadows of a doorway. It's a young 10-year-old boy. He steps out slightly, and he introduces himself to Trix as Rio. Now we, the readers, recognize the physical description instantly. We know this is Joshua. This is the same terrified boy from the farm who stole the alien device from the burned alien corpse. But Trix has no idea who he is. She just sees a scared, filthy kid in an alley.
Rio looks up at her and quietly claims that he has lost a highly valuable toy, and he asks for her help. Trix's maternal protective instincts immediately kick in. But before she can really interrogate him about what he's doing out so late, they are interrupted. 3 of the racist, violent thugs from the carnival mob have wandered down the alley. They spot Trix. They immediately recognize her as the white alien who was hanging around the night beast's cage. They pull out knives and broken bottles, fanning out, blocking the exit, promising horrific violence. Trix steps in front of the boy, preparing to fight for her life.
But she doesn't have to, because her protective instincts are violently interrupted by the most terrifying display of power. Little Rio steps out from behind her. He doesn't look scared at all. He steps toward the armed thugs. And in the dim, flickering light of the alley, Trix watches in absolute horror as the boy's physical body begins to change. He starts to physically inflate. His chest cavity expands outward unnaturally, the bones cracking and shifting underneath his skin, stretching his dirty shirt to the absolute bursting point. He grows taller, broader, his musculature shifting in seconds.
And it isn't just his mass that changes. The skin on his face begins to glow. It starts to strobe rapidly with that exact same hypnotic, biological, zebra-striped pattern of brilliant white and deep black light that the peaceful alien in the field displayed right before Keith shot it.
It is so incredibly creepy. You are watching a human child morph into a flashing, swollen monster. The thugs, who were so brave a second ago with their broken bottles, are absolutely terrified. They drop their weapons. One of them actually drops to his knees, crosses himself, mutters a prayer about alien demons, and then all three of them scramble over each other and sprint away into the night, screaming. Trix is left standing there, completely stunned, her heart hammering in her chest. The boy slowly deflates back to his normal size, the lights on his face fading back to normal skin tone.
And this is where Trix makes a fatal, completely understandable error in judgment. She asks Rio how he did it, but she doesn't ask it with fear. She asks it with awe. She assumes he is using some kind of incredibly advanced, localized, holographic disguise technology. Remember who Trix is as a character. She's a master thief, a con artist, an absolute master of disguise. Her entire life relies on hot, itchy wigs, thick padded clothing, and hours of applying latex makeup. The idea of technology that allows you to physically, instantly change your appearance, your height, your mass, that is the ultimate prize for her. It's the holy grail of her profession.
Her greed completely blinds her to the danger. Rio looks at her, unbuttons his filthy shirt, and reveals the source of the power. Attached directly to the bare skin over his heart is the small, heavy, blue-black, metallic, Y-shaped device, the one Joshua stole from the dead alien.
And here is where the trap snaps completely shut with terrifying precision. Rio looks at her greed and uses it. He promises to show her exactly how the technology works, to let her feel it, if she promises to help him find his missing toy. Trix, salivating over the tech, eagerly agrees. Rio reaches up, grips the Y-shaped metal, and pulls it off his chest. The author describes it peeling away with a thick, wet, sickening sucking sound, like pulling a leech off a vein. He holds it out. Trix eagerly takes it, and without a second thought, she presses the cold metal directly against the bare skin of her own chest.
And the instant the metal touches her skin, the horror begins. The boy, Joshua, who has been standing perfectly still, suddenly violently collapses to the dirty cobblestones like a puppet with its strings brutally cut. His eyes roll back in his head, his limbs twitching, and simultaneously, Trix freezes completely solid. She can't move her arms, she can't blink, she can't breathe. And then a deep, resonant, completely androgynous voice echoes not in the alleyway, but directly, loudly inside the center of Trix's own mind. The voice says, "Thank you."
The psychological whiplash is stunning. Rio is not Joshua. Rio is not a child. Rio is the name of a maker. A maker is a highly advanced, utterly ruthless alien intelligence that has been using 10-year-old Joshua merely as a temporary biological vehicle. The device wasn't a disguise projector. It was a transfer mechanism. The maker has just abandoned the failing hardware of the boy's body and successfully invaded Trix.
The mechanics of how the maker takes over are just staggering. It doesn't just whisper thoughts into her ear. It isn't a ghost possessing her soul. It is a biological invasion at the microscopic level. It paralyzes her motor cortex instantly. Trix internally describes the horrific sensation of being violently shoved backward, compressed into a tiny, muted, dark corner of her own brain, trapped behind her own eyes, watching her own body like a passenger in a hijacked car. The maker calmly, clinically informs her that it is currently subverting her nervous system. It tells her that within a few minutes, it will have established complete administrative control over your cardiovascular and endocrine systems. It is going to forcefully pump adrenaline, regulate her heartbeat, and then, most horrifyingly, it is going to use her own cellular machinery to actively rewrite her DNA from the inside out, strictly to make her a better, stronger vehicle.
The dialogue of the maker, entirely internalized within Trix's mind, is utterly chilling, precisely because of its clinical, emotionless detachment. It isn't malicious, it is merely efficient. Trix, trapped in her own skull, is panicking. She mentally screams at it, begging it to stop, and she looks down at the boy twitching on the ground and asks what happened to Joshua. The maker casually responds that the boy was simply its carrier. It states, as a matter of biological fact, that once a sentient being becomes a carrier, their original persona is forcefully displaced. The host's mind begins to fray and fade, And it tells Trix, with absolute calm, that once it has fully converted her physical body to meet its needs, her specific persona, her memories, her personality, her entire essence, will cease to be necessary for the operation of the vehicle, and it will be disposed of, deleted.
Think about the massive tragic irony here for Trix. She has spent her entire life desperately trying to change her appearance, putting on masks, pretending to be other people to survive. The Maker is promising to give her exactly what she always wanted, the ultimate biological power, the ability to fundamentally redistribute her body mass, to shift her skeletal structure, to instantly change her skin pigmentation using cellular chromatophores, to become literally anyone. But the horrific cost of achieving that perfect disguise is the complete, permanent, unrecoverable erasure of the woman wearing it.
If we connect this specific horror back to the wider events of the novel, it links perfectly to a brief, incredibly disturbing scene earlier in the text. Remember Uncle Ake, the man who helped murder the alien and then pulverized its bones in the field out of guilt? Well, later, Ake is out walking in the fields alone. He is suddenly consumed by a tidal wave of bubbling, iridescent gray goo. The goo is a biological weapon. It dissolves the grass, it washes over him, and it turns his skin rotten and gray in seconds. It completely subsumes his biology, overriding his nervous system, leaving him standing there as a converted, emotionless biological drone. The Makers, we realize, are a planetary-scale assimilation force. They don't conquer by shooting lasers. They conquer by digesting, rewriting, and optimizing existing biomass to create better versions of life for their own exclusive use. They are rewriting the ecosystem of Espero from the inside out.
And Trix is experiencing that massive planetary assimilation on a deeply intimate, terrifyingly personal level. She is trapped in the dark corner of her mind, screaming internally, "I won't be me." And the Maker doesn't gloat. It just flatly, logically replies, "That is correct. You will not be you. You will be me." The loss of bodily autonomy is absolute. She is forced to watch as her own hands, moving without her permission, reach up to adjust her clothing. She experiences the sudden, shocking physical upgrade as her optic nerves are forcefully rewired, granting her enhanced, silvery, high-definition night vision.
She sees the alleyway in terrifying clarity.
Yes, and with that new, perfect alien vision, she is forced to look down and watch little Joshua lying on the dirty cobblestones. She watches the 10-year-old boy take his last breath and die in the dirt simply because his internal organs, after being puppeteered by the alien parasite for so long, have completely forgotten how to function on their own without the Maker's constant overriding administrative control. The boy's biology just shuts down. It is devastating.
Which brings us to a crucial point of synthesis for everything we've discussed today. This narrative, at its core, is a massive, brilliantly interwoven exploration of identity, memory, and the horrific cost of rewriting the past. We have journeyed through multiple layers of this theme. We started with a tragic, violent first contact in a dark field, driven entirely by a society's xenophobic fear of the unknown, a fear born from their deliberate erasure of their own Earth history. We moved through the petty technological machinations of a decaying, desperate imperial palace clinging to fake diamond traditions. And we ended with a terrifying microscopic biological assimilation of a main character's very DNA in a dirty alleyway.
It really is a masterpiece of thematic storytelling. It forces you to sit back and seriously think about your own life. Think about how much of you, your personality, your fears, your loves, your quirks, is just a fragile collection of your memories. Think about what you would become if someone or some advanced alien intelligence just reached into your skull and started casually rewriting those files. Or perhaps even more terrifyingly, what if they erased them entirely, leaving you a blank slate, much like the Doctor actively chose to do to himself to escape his grief?
Exactly. We've talked extensively today about the macro-level danger of a society deliberately choosing to forget its past, dooming itself to cultural decay and violent paranoia. And we've analyzed the deeply personal tragedy of the Doctor choosing to forget his own personal trauma, deciding that being nobody is better than being a man who lost Miranda to the time winds. But consider the Maker currently residing inside Trix's nervous system. The Maker represents an entirely different, far more insidious threat to identity. The Maker doesn't destroy memories, it consumes them. It utilizes the host's existing DNA and neural pathways as a base template, a raw material to be optimized.
Which leaves us with a deeply unsettling thought to end on.
It does. If an incredibly advanced alien entity enters your body, perfectly replicates your specific DNA, gains full access to your deepest memories, takes absolute control of your physical form, and then quietly, efficiently deletes your original consciousness in the driver's seat, at what exact molecular moment do you cease to be human? If the body walking around looks exactly like you and has your memories, but isn't you, at what point do you become the monster yourself?
That is an incredibly heavy, profoundly chilling thought to leave you with today. I want you to genuinely think about that the exact next time you catch your own reflection in the mirror. Are you really the author of your own history? Thank you so much for carving out the time to join us for this incredible, expansive deep dive into the crumbling, unforgettable world of Espero. We absolutely love taking these long, winding journeys with you, unpacking the dense layers of these narratives and finding the hidden connections that resonate with our own lives. Keep questioning the narratives you were given, keep learning about the past, and we will catch you right back here on the next one.